So, you and your friends are wanting to play a game of Dungeons & Dragons. Everyone has their characters created and ready to play. But there's one key factor that's missing: the Dungeon Master. What does one need to become this almighty keeper of the game? Well, fear?
Whoa. Hang on a minute, Crow. You might need some backup on this one.
Okay, why's that?
Well, not to belittle your DM capabilities, but it might help to have someone that's had a little bit more experience at DMing than you to give some pointers and tips.
Good point. Well, in this special two-parter episode of Nat 1, we'll be going over the components needed to start your journey into dungeon mastering for D&D 5e. Hello everyone, I'm KrowOfMurderXV. So, in this first part of this two-parter episode, I'll be going over what responsibilities and tools you'll need as a Dungeon Master, or DM for short. So even though we very shortly talked about it in the very first episode of this series, what exactly is a Dungeon Master? A Dungeon Master is going to be the quote-unquote storyteller of your adventure. Think of them as kind of a narrator, but without sounding like a 1920s radio announcer. They will also be responsible for all of the non-player characters, or NPCs, that the party interacts with, as well as all of the enemies. They'll tell you when to make certain dice rolls, such as checks, saves, and encounters, and essentially let you know what's going on in the world around you. Now, if you're going to consider DMing for your group, here's a few extra items that you're going to need. Along with the player's handbook, you'll need the Monster Manual. This book will have all of the information for all of the standard monsters and creatures in D&D 5e. There are a lot more options with different expansions, but for now, we'll stick with the basics. Another good book to have on hand is the Dungeon Master's Guide. This won't necessarily tell you every little thing to do as a DM, but it's a great reference guide. For example, let's say that your party has inherited a tavern. The Dungeon Master's Guide will actually tell you different costs for the upkeep for that tavern, such as guards, trade goods sales, and so on. Hey, no one said owning a tavern would be easy, or cheap for that matter. Another thing you'll need is a Dungeon Master screen. This is that big screen you usually see that sits in front of the table in front of the Dungeon Master. Now, the screen can be made up however you want depending on your DMing style, but there's a few key things you'll definitely want to have on your screens for your reference, so that way you're not scurrying through your player's handbook to look up some information. You'll want to have a tracker screen to keep track of all of your players and monsters that are in combat, as well as the order they'll go in. On another sheet, you want to have your references to combat, such as combat steps, actions, what players can do and cannot do on their turn, advantages and disadvantages, how much potions of healing will heal, and your cover system. On your third sheet, you'll want a page with all of the conditions, what they do, the different levels of exhaustion, concentration conditions, and dying conditions. On your last sheet, it's a good idea to have some general adventuring information on it, such as what the different ability checks are, benefits of short and long rests, different difficulty checks, environmental hazards, traps and the DC saves for those traps, traveling pace, and damage severity. Now, it's not necessary for your DM screen to be set up like this, but it's really good practice. Most DM screens will be set up this way, but there are some that are customizable, so feel free to customize to your comfort level. So, now that you have most of your tools, how do you get an adventure started? Well, there's two options. The first one being you can follow a module. A module is a pre-written campaign that you'll follow step by step in order to keep the story flowing. Don't worry though, you don't have to follow it exactly how it's written. Which leads me to the second type, homebrew. Homebrew is where you create the campaign on your own, taking the different information from different book sources and making the adventure up. Now, for new DMs, I highly recommend using a module for your first campaign. And as you start to gain more and more experience as a dungeon master, maybe throw in a homebrew character or event that wasn't originally written for that campaign. Speaking of writing, it is also the DM's responsibility to write down all of the events for each session, the loot that the party gained, as well as the experience points if you're doing XP leveling, and general information if the party has questions. Now please note that the players should also keep track of all of this information as well. Now I'm sure I'm probably missing a few things here and there, but this is essentially everything you'll need to start your journey as a DM. That does it for part 1. Join us next time for part 2, where myself and DX Kramer will sit down and talk about our different experiences as DMs and the different styles of DMing. Until then, guide your players to glory, but don't make it too easy for them. See you next time.